Very good. We will begin, it's 1:30. We'll begin our liquor control agenda for today. Thank everybody for coming. We have 4 items on the agenda. Number 1 is approved minutes from the July 28th, 2021 meeting. If there are any changes or corrections, we can listen to those. Otherwise, we will accept a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 2, 2A is application for a Class FA alcoholic beverage license for Sicky's ND Incorporated, doing business as Sicky's Garage and Burgers and Brews, to be located at 2551 45th Street South. Steve.
Good afternoon, commission members. So we received this application, and my first thought was, oh, they're going to move Sicky's from 13th Avenue over to 45th. But Carrie Fernholz, one of the applicants, immediately corrected me and said, no, we're going to have 2 locations. So that's good. So a couple of items showed up in the background check. Mr. Upton had several items in the criminal history, but all of them were more than 10 years old. And Mr. Vio had 2 items in the criminal history, and both of those are more than 5 years old. And so they would still fall within the guidelines that we have, that a recommendation of approval would be okay.
So Steve, I have a question for you. So the current location, do they have an FA license as well? And how are they as far as reaching the threshold and things like that?
They do currently operate with an FA license. They have never been anywhere close to not meeting the requirements. They're always up in the 65 to 70% food sales. So they're very good.
Very good. Are there any other comments or questions?
I have a question for the chief. I'm just wondering if the 5-year threshold is to, do you approve of that? Or do you think it should be longer, or are you okay with a 5-year threshold?
It's a 5-year threshold for the violations?
For the background checks, yeah.
No, I think it should be more than that, yes.
You think it should be more than that?
Yeah, I think at least we should look further back and let the board evaluate. I think there are some things sometimes that are relevant, especially, well, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
It sounds like another item that we can put on the to-do list of reviewing. Prior to 2018, we really didn't have guidelines. And so when I was on the liquor board, we would take each one and say, and kind of evaluate whether or not we felt like, the license should be approved. And in 2018, Chief Todd asked that we establish some guidelines, and those were the recommendations that he had. And certainly with the new chief, it might be appropriate to look and see, if those should be revisited. Some of those maybe should be a little bit longer out. Yep.
And I've discussed this with Nancy Morris as well. So I think when the dust settles and she can catch up, that there'll be a package of some suggested ordinance changes related to liquor.
Okay. Thank you.
So Chief, while you're up there, do you mind if I ask what in the past, what have you done in your past service, and also what would you recommend?
Well, in I guess in Wisconsin, we would get an applicant's complete record in time and then put that together for evaluation, looking at some of your specific parameters, because, assuming, I guess, an arbitrary 5-year non-record between someone who, let's say, has an offense for delivery of controlled substance, something that we definitely would have concerns with their ability to properly run an establishment like this, the 5-year no arrest thing might be because they were even in prison. And so I think we should look in totality and then evaluate from there. And, I'll make my recommendations from a reasonable perspective, and then the board can make that decision as well. But I don't think we should be boxing ourselves in, so to speak, because I don't think we're, in some instances, getting the full picture of the potential applicant.
Thank you for that.
Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we will accept a motion.
Motion to approve?
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. 2B, application to transfer a Class F alcoholic beverage license from Drunken Noodle DBA Wasabi Poke Bowl to Wasabi Poke Bowl LLC, doing business as Wasabi Poke Bowl, to be located at 560 2nd Avenue North. Ownership change. Steve.
That's exactly right, Commissioner. This is an ownership change. The previous owners of Wasabi Poke Bowl basically are just selling, the business, and the new owners want to continue offering the alcohol. We've gone through the background check. There are no issues on this one. The Class F license allows them to sell full alcohol. The food sales must exceed the alcohol sales. The alcohol, they can't have a bar in the facility. So with that, I guess we'd be seeking a recommendation of approval.
Do you have any comments or questions?
I do. So why is this a transfer? Why doesn't this license go back to the city and then the new business owners buy it from the city?
Well, again, this would be a going concern, where this is, everything is staying the same with this business, and in this case, including the name. So,
I really struggle with the transfer. I guess.
yeah, and in this case, with the GHF licenses, the initial fee, they really aren't like saving a lot of money or anything like that. The F license is a $3,000 initial fee, and they're going to pay us $1,500 on transfer. So, they're really saving only $1,500, but it's something, again, I think, as we, as the chief said, as the dust settles and we mature a little bit, I think those are all things we can look at, about the transferring and that type of stuff.
I'd really like to see everything comprehensive within the city. So to me, it should be a level playing field, that when a business changes ownership, even if it's one person, that it needs to go back to the city and it's a whole new application, because even one voice can change the whole dynamic of that business. So to me, I think it's just in the city's best interest to completely do away with the transfer altogether. That's where I'm coming from with this.
Very good. Any other comments or questions?
Kay, could you expand on what you mean by an even playing field there?
Well, so for example, there are licenses that are capped. And we have organizations who may have had to pay $300,000 for a $100,000 license in the beginning. So if that license would have gone back to the city, then that new business owner would pay $100,000 for that license rather than $300,000. And to me, when we're talking those numbers, it provides a huge incentive, and I'm not saying that that's what businesses do, but it provides an incentive for over-serving, because we need to make up that $100,000 liquor license. And so what kinds of issues does it bring about? So if that license, if the original license went back to the city and the new owner paid $100,000, that's $200,000 less than. And we have the city has no real control over that, am I right? That's the way it is, and you don't know what the license fees are when businesses sell to each other?
That's correct.
I think it would just be better bookkeeping and a clean slate, and just everybody's treated the same, so.
Very good. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we will accept a motion.
I'll move.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Motion and a second. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 3, liquor license classification. K.
Okay, so that kind of ties in with my not wanting to do transfers anymore. And I think that I've done some investigating from other licensed cities and what their classifications are. And we by far have the most complex system of those that I've looked at. And I didn't go in depth. I'm just interested in knowing if the rest of the board would be interested in the reclassification of licenses so that we can simplify what we've got going on. We've asked the city commission to approve yet another license, that's number 34. And when I looked at the other cities, Grand Forks, Sioux Falls, Bismarck, West Fargo, nobody has that many licenses. And I think at the same time, we can look at the cost of licenses because we have by far the most expensive licenses too. And I guess I don't understand how we came about with the licensing fee structure. How did we get up to $100,000, $115,000 for a license? I don't understand the rationale for that. So I'm simply asking if that's something that this board would be interested in, is simplifying our liquor license classification.
I guess I'll just say a couple things. First of all, just to make changes isn't always the best thing. And I do agree it's very complicated. When I first was on the commission, it's very complicated. But I think we have to be very careful if we're making changes. There has to be reason behind it. And I do think part of the reason we have so many licenses is we try to be we try to work with new businesses as much as we can. And I also think our downtown now, we are entertainment district, not just for Fargo and not just for Cass County, but for this region. And so I think that's part of it too. I would be supportive of taking a look at it, but to make changes, just to make changes, I don't know if I would support that. So any other comments?
I don't really have a comment. I was just maybe a question to Steve in terms of managing 34 different classes of license. Again, I kind of took interest in Dave's point is that I think we look at each one uniquely and kind of are light on our feet in terms of how we manage the situation. Is that better or worse than a simpler program like Kay is talking about, where I don't know how many licenses West Fargo or Grand Forks has, hypothetically say 5. What's your perspective on how those two would compare and contrast?
It starts getting to be a very deep conversation, but so a couple of aspects here. First of all, I agree with you that we've remained light on our feet, or whatever term you want to use. We have created a number of licenses, because the industry has, or the market has seen a change or requested a change. We've also denied a number of requests too for new licenses. The single malt Scotch license, that one didn't make it off the ground. So it has to be a very unique type of situation when we create something. The first thing we try to do is get them to fit within our model that we have. We also try to encourage them not to seek a license, just to get a license. We want to make sure they get the right license for their business. As far as managing that, it's really a matter of having a conversation with the people that are applying and getting to know what their plan is, what their goals are. If they're really wanting to run a restaurant, my staff is really good at kind of doing that triage also. And just this week, in fact, we had a lady that called in and is going to open an Indian style restaurant, and she started asking questions about the liquor license, and she wanted this, and she wanted this, and wanted this. And then when we finally got down to it, what she really wanted was just beer and wine served at the table. And and so we can help them get to what it is that they're really looking for. Now would it be easier for staff if it was just simple, on sale, off sale, liquor, beer, wine, and you pick whatever combination you want? Certainly it would be easier. One of the things that we have always tried to do is to make sure that the applicant has, we use that quote, skin in the game, that, that they have something at risk, so that if, that they don't look at that liquor license lightly, that they realize that that's something that's important. And so one of the ways that we can provide importance to that is through the pricing structure. The prices the costs of the licenses that we have currently were all in place before I started. I feel like the answer to your question was that's what they were going for on the open market at the time they set those prices. So the AB license, which is, probably the most powerful license, it's the on and off sale with no food requirement. You can have a bar. And that one on our books is 150,000. So, about that time, that's probably what they were trading for. And so they capped them and set the cost at that. I'd be glad to, I do have some ideas on how we could, decrease the number of licenses without changing the integrity or the structure that we have. And I'd be glad to share some of those thoughts with you.
Okay.
Commissioner Dave, I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the presentation we got at the last meeting with the statistics and the proximity and all of that, I think that would play into this too. What I know about liquor license theory going back many years is one of the reasons the licenses were high is because they are limited. And that the thing that a city wants to avoid is the pandering of alcohol. And that's where things get so competitive that there's a lot of failures and people start doing unethical ways of business. And that's bars or package stores. That could be just crazy low prices, crazy promotions, etc. So I think the city could use some information about all the things that are usually considered, density, proximity to other stores, to schools, how we deal with grocery stores, how we deal with pharmacies will want liquor licenses, big box, all that stuff, and kind of come up with that plan. And then the next step would be to look into how these licenses are, et cetera. One of the things that personally, and you bring up a great series of questions, but it opens up 100 more. And there's people that are in this room and Steve that have been doing this for a long time. And, knock on wood, Fargo is growing, and you want to also be able to invite somebody new in. Because what's going to happen when the next big grocery store, or I was down in the cities yesterday and my wife had to go to Trader Joe's, had to go. Well, if they come to Fargo and they want a liquor license, are we going to have to change the rules to get them one? Because that's the right thing for the tax base, et cetera. So, the high prices they pay, the bars that have ABs, right now, they consider that an asset. They consider that part of their retirement. They paid the price, whatever it was, back when they got started. And if you think about it, 20 years ago, $350,000, really a lot of money. And that's what some of them paid. In Bismarck, they auctioned off licenses where they had one and like 4 or 5 people were bidding for it. And I think it ended up going for $600,000 or $700,000. And the city used that as obviously a cash flow opportunity. So there's all kinds of ethics involved too, I think. But you have a whole bunch of businesses out there right now that's an asset to them, whether it's listed under Blue Sky or licenses. And it's important that we respect that, because those people have played by the rules, some of them for 20, 30, 40 years, and built their businesses, and they're almost all family businesses. So we're really getting into a big project here, and it very well could be worth it. But again, I would suggest we go back to some of the data so that the city commission can decide, okay, here's what we're concerned about. Here's what our priorities are with alcohol. Because I've seen Dave, I've seen all of you guys in the city commission meetings say, well, this seems like too much, and turn licenses down. But then there's guys that come in town, they have a great plan. This would be good for the city. It's fun. It's interesting. They seem like good business people. Let's do something with them. And my hat's off to Mr. Sprague, how you've handled all this over the years. And I'm sure you've taken a lot of heat from a lot of people, and you've made a lot of people very happy too. So it's a two-sided coin. So
Lydia.
I think I agree that, there's some ways that we could streamline. And I'm not talking about like a big overhaul or anything, but maybe there's some categories that can be merged and just to see, have that discussion. And because you know, one of my most treasured possessions now, I think, is the binder with the diagram that Steve gave us with like what each license is and how it works. But I have heard from some potential, you know, business owners and other business owners that, you know, it is a little confusing. So maybe there's just for some of these smaller categories, that maybe there's some opportunities for merging them without it being a whole, you know, to do, and it makes everyone's lives a little bit easier. So I'd be willing to work more on that.
I just think it is, and I think the best thing would be for you to meet with Steve individually too, and all of us. I think Steve's willing to meet with us at any time, but it's very complicated. So to give you an example, let's say that we decided to change. Right now, the licenses are owned by individual owners. Well, let's say we changed our philosophy and decided to buy those all back. Well, that's a very complicated. How do you determine the value, and where do we get the budget for that? And so there's a lot of things, and I do think they're all good questions, and that's why I appreciate anybody here can put something on the agenda, and that's a good thing. And so I do think it opens up a lot of things. And so I've actually been on, I think 2008 was when I started on liquor control. And so I've been around kind of a long time. And when I first got on, it is very complicated. But I once again, I want to caution, just because it's complicated doesn't mean we should get rid of it. But I do think there's lots of good things we should look at. And obviously we just came out with our census numbers. This town is not the same as it was 25 years ago. So that's part of it too. And so this is a good time to look at that. On the flip side, on a positive note, so our downtown now, it's phenomenal. When you go down there, people, the businesses and the activity, it's going to be even more so. And so now's the time to kind of make sure we have everything prepared for future success. So I appreciate that. Any other comments from anybody? But I don't know how we should proceed, but if this is okay, my request would be for you to meet with Steve. But I think then as a group, this is a conversation that all of us will participate in. But I think that's a good start if that's okay with you. Does that sound good? Yep.
I'd like to go to that as well, if we're doing something.
And so the main thing we have to be careful of, I think we all would benefit by having this, but you can only have two commissioners at a time. And so I think that's good, but we have to keep that in mind, correct? And so Steve, you'll keep track of that, and I think we'll just proceed. But there's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts, and I think we should always be interested in making more improvements to make this better, and that's what we're trying to do. So, Any other comments? Any other things? Otherwise, are we ready to move on to the next one? All right. Number 4 is Police Department Monthly Report, the windbreak. Chief.
Good afternoon, everybody. You received a packet with a whole bunch of information. Most of that is just for your information in terms of locations that we've been at, calls that we've taken for other licensed premises. And yes, the main focus here, where I'm going to ask for some action on your part, has to do with the windbreak located at 3150 39th Street. So as we, again, started into this new process throughout June and July, we had a number of instances at the windbreak with a similar theme of underage drinking. And specifically on June 18th, we were sent there, we were sent to a traffic crash nearby. And the 19-year-old who was intoxicated and got in the crash admitted that she was drinking at the windbreak and was admitted there using her fake Wisconsin ID. We went there and talked to staff about that. That was on June 18th. On June 24th, we get sent back over there again. There was some type of a fight that had erupted outside about 11:30 p.m. And it involved a 19-year-old female who was also under the influence, but who had been in the bar and was wearing a windbreak bracelet, wristband, if you will, just like the other gal was. And in speaking with her, she admitted that her boyfriend had actually purchased 2 wristbands at the door and gave her one. She was never carded, but admitted access into the licensed premise where she consumed alcohol, and then, of course, the fight broke out. And we have a couple other calls there of not much significance. We had a security guard that was accosted in the parking lot. Doesn't appear to be any wrongdoing on their part. But in terms of the underage drinking, I had Deputy Chief Anderson speak with the general manager Michael, who is here today on July 20th, about our concerns with the underage drinking. Again, suggesting, as we have done with many other owners, that they purchase an ID scanner. In one of these reports, there's an indication from the security that, oh, we've been seeing a lot of Wisconsin IDs on this particular night, which is the exact ID that a lot of these people were using and was fake. It's not discernible by your security. In that conversation, though, there wasn't a feeling by the ownership that they needed to do this, that their security staff was sufficient to resolve the problem, and I again expressed my concerns that their security staff will not recognize a scanned ID or a fake ID. I also spoke with Mr. Klimek on August 6th, had a similar conversation with him. He did not indicate an interest in doing this either, and had a concern about if they had a scanner that they wouldn't be able to get people into the establishment quick enough, that it would somehow upend the expeditious entry of patrons into their establishment. So I kind of walked through the process with him, talked about some of the other successes we had seen with the other establishments. And also he, I guess, stated at one point they used to have a scanner, but because when they called about fake IDs, the cops didn't always get there. They didn't think it was worthwhile. So I guess my point in all of this really is the goal is to keep underage people out of the tavern to prevent these things from happening. A fake ID is a fake ID. They can cut it in half and toss it out right there. I know Michael's here. I don't know if he wants to address any of that, but I want to get back to the specific incident on June 24th. Let's see where we're at here. And in that instance, again, the female admitted that she had gotten in after her boyfriend purchased the second wristband. So she was inside the tavern. She was never carted inside. She pled guilty to this charge as well and paid a fine and some community service. And so I would ask for the board to consider action in violation, following the matrix, in violations by the windbreak of allowing an underage person to be on the premise. And just to add to that, when I did ask about the wristband with Mr. Klimek, he said that couldn't happen or shouldn't happen, but I think the fact that this woman admitted all of this, pled guilty to it, and we've got corroborating statements would substantiate that it did in fact happen, and she was in there underage and was.
Chief, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So obviously you recommend this penalty, but also could we ask or demand that they have a card reader installed? Is that something that you would recommend? I guess from my perspective, and I've been present when you've asked some of the bars that have had issues to put them in, and then they did, but to me, that they intentionally did not, to me, that bothers me. So what I'd like to do is mandate to say they have to have one installed.
Right. I think the city attorney would probably, we've talked about this, say that we would need to amend our ordinance in order to make that possible. And I think that's also part of a future package that we're discussing, is that something like that gets put in place. So I guess I would suggest talking to the city attorney. In my conversations, I don't think that this board could do that at this juncture, but again, I would seek that counsel. And I guess along the same lines, I wanted to bring up this last one in your packet from August 13th, and this is a similar concern. Our officers were dispatched to a vandalism to a vehicle that was parked outside of the windbreak, and the gal there had been inside. She was fine. The issue was that when she contacted the windbreak security and asked them to contact the police about the damage to her vehicle, the security person advised her to drive home and call the police there. And that if she wanted to call the police and not drive her, that she should go there, and if she did that, wait till she's out of the lot to call the police, he would offer her gift cards. So again, my concern is not only that they don't seem to be taking this issue seriously, but at least for some reason, one of their security personnel is now taking it upon themselves to offer gift cards to encourage people not to call the police when something happens at the establishment.
Any other comments or questions?
Yes, I have a comment, or, for these establishments that are using, wristbands and, stamps and things like that, these are mostly places where the security people are checking the IDs. And I think that's intended to signify, it's for easy in and out access. Those are supposed to signify that their IDs have kind of been checked at the door. I don't really understand why, with the responsibility that we place on servers to check IDs, that we're not asked, and having now done the server training, and I know that it's all about ID checking, why we're not requiring the people who are checking the IDs at these establishments to also take that training.
Right. Well, I would surmise that they feel it's much easier to issue the wristband, assuming the ID's been checked, and make it that much quicker to serve alcohol, which creates all these other problems. And then, of course, we have the whole lack of integrity in the sale of the wristbands themselves, because obviously I doubt this is the only girl who was able to purchase more than one. And so I think that's a valid point. They still should be checking IDs, but that's how they're functioning. And we've seen a couple instances here in June where this has been undermined. So just like everything else, where someone thinks they can go and get away with something, this establishment would be my concern is going to be a magnet for everyone with a fake ID, because they see this as an easy mark to get in if they're underage.
I'd like to discuss the possibility of requiring that whoever's checking the IDs to enter the establishment has to take the server training.
But that's not that's not actually the issue in this case, though, because the person at the door is allegedly checking an ID and then selling the wristband at the door.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're selling you show me your ID, and then you purchase 2 wristbands, then the second person walks in with a wristband and is never checked.
Oh, that should clearly not happen.
That's what happened
In a
in
broader
this instance,
sense,
yes.
at these kinds of club places where, I think it's very likely that, we're likely to get young people trying to get into these bars. But I agree that people should not be buying multiple.
Right, and that's really
That shouldn't
the
happen.
gist of the
Yeah.
issue in these cases. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nancy, can I ask you a question? Going back to the requiring them to have a card reader, is that something that we have to do at the commission level to change the policy?
I would say yes, and I think if this board made a motion to direct the city attorney, and then it went up to city commission and they agreed and approved changing the ordinance to add a card reader requirement, I think there are some things that need to be further considered with that. We can say a card reader or scanner, but I don't know what one looks like and what brands there are and what they accomplish and what we would be requiring on that. So I think we need to get a little bit more information about what we would be requiring. My notes also reflect, we had talked about, are there going to be some video requirements? Are they, what will be required? Is that going to be required as part of the ordinance? So I think there are some things that we need to get more information about before we actually try to implement an ordinance change. But I think that would be the direction that we would want to go.
So basically, the next step would be that for our board to request it, and then maybe the chief can help you as far as the details of the requirements. But so to summarize, what the chief has been doing is, we've had some issues at some bars, and he's requested them, and I think that's been nice. And some have complied, but now if there are some that aren't, to me that's the next step. I think it's a proven thing that works well. And then on top of that, the IDs, I think we've already talked about that. They're so difficult to, if you looked at them just with the naked eye, the fakes are so authentic looking that it's difficult. So anyway, if that makes sense to everybody else, I do think that's kind of our next step. And if there's any other comments or questions.
I have a question. If we mandate having a scanner there, who pays for that scanner? If the business pays for it, then are they obligated to turn over that data to us?
Could I just wait?
Go ahead, Chief.
Before you, everything that you're discussing has already been part of discussions that I've had with the city attorney. There are a lot of things to consider in setting up parameters. So I think we're all in agreement that something like this is needed, but I think we need to take the time to think about not only what types of equipment, as the city attorney has mentioned, but also what parameters. So will every business, for instance, your bar and restaurant, require a scan? There's different things to look at versus an establishment that is just a bar, and there's a lot of people going in and out, and these types of things are happening. So I think it would be, certainly you can do as you wish and making a motion, but I think if you're doing that, I would suggest maybe recommending that a package be put together by the city attorney. The police department will work with them, and we could even have someone from the Liquor Control Board as part of that group to try and maybe even some potential owners who might want to weigh in from a owner perspective on what might be a reasonable approach, and then we can put together a package for commission consideration, or run it through here first and then up to the commission.
That sounds good to me. I don't know if that's kind of a long motion, and so if we could shorten it up.
Even if you don't make a motion, that's what we're going to do anyway. So I guess if you're comfortable with that.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
Yes.
so I would suggest that the motion just be that you direct the city attorney to explore these scanners and implementation of an ordinance to adopt that. And then that would then go up to the city commission, and if the city commission approves, then we will, start that process of working with the police and owners and technology and figure out how that comes to play. But we want to make sure that that's the direction of the city commission as well.
Very good. Do we have a motion?
I will make the motion.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And so let's go back to the windbreak, because I don't think we had a motion. Could you, I know you talked about the issue, but if you could just clarify what it is on the matrix that they would be penalized, just so everyone's clear on that. And Nancy, maybe you have that at your disposal, but I think the main thing is just so it's a concise motion, so we know what the penalty is. Thank you.
I can address that. It's a violation of 25-1509, which is to sell, serve, dispense alcohol to a person under 21, allowing the person under 21 to have alcohol on the licensed premises. The first offense is a $500 and mandatory server training. That $500 may be waived, as we've talked in the past, and then there is no license sanction on that first offense.
So that's the motion. So I don't know if we have any comments, or go ahead.
How many offenses are we, it's more than one offense, right?
Chief.
One offense in which I would say that they were culpable. I think the other one is similar, but this one clearly there was a second wristband purchase and no carding took place.
So it's just one offense.
I also have a question for the mandatory server training. Who's getting the mandatory server training in this instance?
I think that what would be required here would be that all of the employees that would be doing this selling, serving, dispensing would be required to have server training.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Do we have a motion?
I move to follow the matrix and recommendation from the chief.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. That's the last item on our agenda. Thank you, everybody. It was lots of good discussion today. Thank you for coming, and we are adjourned.